All right, welcome back to the channel. So, according to Virgil Ortiz's team, Errol Spence is an easier fight than Terence Crawford, and he's ready to beat both of them right now. Let's talk about what Robert Garcia and Eduardo Garcia had to say about the matchups in this. All right, welcome back to the channel. So we have a changing of the guard slowly happening in the welterweight division. You have top welterweights like Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford, Sean Porter, Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, who have all been in the 147-pound division for several years now, have really put themselves on top of the division, specifically Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. And there's a lot of excitement around that weight division. Many people say that it is definitely the deepest division in the sport of boxing. But along with those established stars in the welterweight division, there's a couple up-and-coming guys that many people believe will take over the division in the years to come, right? Within this year, next year. And I'm not talking about 5 years. I'm talking about within the next 2 years, 2.5 years. And those two people are Virgil Ortiz, who's represented by Golden Boy Promotions, and Jaron Ennis, who I do believe is managed or promoted by Cameron Duncan. But those are the two guys that are really threatening to take over the welterweight division as those fighters that I named before either move up to the 154-pound division or, retire from the sport of boxing. Guys like Manny Pacquiao don't have very much longer. I don't think Keith Thurman probably has but another 3-4 fights left. Same for Sean Porter. Terence Crawford is getting up there at 33. Not that many more fights for him. But Virgil Ortiz, according to most of the mainstream media, is the first guy to really separate himself from the pack, from the pack of people competing for that to take over that division. Now, after Virgil Ortiz won his last fight against Maurice Hooker, there was a lot of talk about Errol Spence, about him moving to fight Terence Crawford next. So I don't really put a lot of weight into that. A lot of people kind of played it off like, yeah, okay, sure. But in an interview that took place, I think it was Ellie Sethback on ES News had with Robert Garcia and Robert Garcia's father, Eduardo Garcia, I really was looking at these guys' faces and listening to the tone in their voice. And I mean, in short, they really do believe it about Virgil Ortiz, specifically that Virgil Ortiz will beat everybody in the division now, right? So specifically when Robert Garcia, who is the trainer of Virgil Ortiz, he's also the trainer and brother of Mikey Garcia, which is relevant to this discussion. And he's the son of Eduardo Garcia, and Eduardo Garcia was the trainer of Robert Garcia. Robert Garcia, I do believe, at a point in time held a 130-pound title, and he's the trainer of probably his best fighter, unless somebody can tell me somebody else, which was Fernando Vargas. Fernando Vargas, who was a great 154-pound champion, was never, really as good as Oscar De La Hoya or Winky Wright and those guys, but he was right there in the mix in the early 2000s with those fights. Was a big fan of Fernando Vargas's. So these guys have a lot of institutional knowledge and really understand specifically that weight class. So when talked about, who they could fight next, obviously they were saying, well, the Terence Crawford fight is easiest because, in the words of Eduardo Garcia, I think he's not taken, or I can't remember what the exact translation was, but what he meant was that he is covered by another promotional outfit, right? Which Golden Boy could work with, right? So many people understand that there is a rift in boxing between the PBC, which is Premier Boxing Champion, which is sort of like an ongoing television program where fighters who are signed to, advised by Al Haymon or promoted by promoters that are associated with Al Haymon and the PBC put these fights on. So Eduardo said that the easiest fight for Terence Crawford would be, for Virgil Ortiz would be the Terence Crawford fight because you would get a lot less, there'd be a lot less stress around making that fight than there would be with the guys with the PBC. So, but the belief that Eduardo and Robert have in Virgil Ortiz, to me, is just, I mean, it was kind of mind-boggling because he really went down not just Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford, but he was like, they believe that Virgil Ortiz will beat Sean Porter right now, that they'll beat Yordenis Ugas right now, that he'll beat Errol Spence, Terence Crawford right now. But they say, why wait? Why really push it now? Because, we have time. He's only 23 years old, and the rest of these guys are already in their 30s. So even though they feel like he would be competitive with them now or be able to beat them now, they're like, let's hold up and take a little while, make sure that his skills get all the way to where they need to be and he can be the best fighter that he can be before we start and we go and we fight for those championships and win those championships. Specifically as it applies to Errol Spence, though, I thought that the rationale for Eduardo was a little bit dangerous. And Robert were a little bit dangerous because when they were asked about Terence Crawford, v. Errol Spence, they believed that the fight with Errol Spence Jr. would be an easier fight for Virgil Ortiz than the fight with Terence Crawford. And their rationale was that they believed that Terence Crawford is actually a stronger fighter than Errol Spence Jr. is. And there is where I think these guys really miss something. I'm not sure, but I suspect that the reason that they believe this is because of the fight that took place between the two camps, the Garcia camp and the Spence camp. And that was clearly the Mikey Garcia fight. They believed going into the fight that Mikey Garcia had a chance to win. Now, I know that Eduardo Garcia and Robert Garcia initially said, nah, not now, go up to 147 pounds, have a couple fights at 147, get used to fighting at 147 before you fight Errol Spence, right? But they went into that fight and Mikey Garcia went the distance. Mikey Garcia walked out of there with the impression that he didn't, that Errol Spence Jr. really didn't beat him up that bad, that he just, he lost the fight, but they didn't walk away feeling as if, Errol Spence Jr. ran through Mikey Garcia. So clearly they believe that Errol Spence Jr. didn't have the strength necessary to take him out. I think that they might want to look at, though, the training and the situation that was happening with Errol Spence in the last several fights before the Danny Garcia fight. And that was one where he admittedly was not training up to up to what he believed that he should be to be in the best shape that he was in. That he had went from when he was a contender, from training every day, right, all year long, to when he won his belt and he was having a hard time getting fights, and there was a lot of inactivity there, that his training went down. It went up all the way to, or it decreased all the way to, prior to the Mikey Garcia fight, that, he didn't really start working out until training camp started. So I think that what you'll find is that was a weaker Errol Spence Jr. in that fight than you will see moving forward. And proof of this to me is what Errol Spence Jr. has looked like when he was at the Virgil Ortiz versus Maurice Hooker fight. I've seen Errol Spence Jr. at fights before this far off from a fight. Right now, Errol Spence Jr. does not have a fight named, even though I believe, and hopefully I'm correct, that it'll be Yordenis Ugas, but he's not even in camp, and he is really, really close to weight. He's back with Blu-ray, working on his strength and conditioning. If I was Robert and Eduardo Garcia, I would not count on Virgil Ortiz coming in stronger than Errol Spence Jr. I think Errol Spence Jr. is just as big, stronger, and I think he's a much better fighter. And I think that at this stage, he'll knock out Virgil Ortiz or beat Virgil Ortiz so badly that it'll be a 12-round and nothing shutout, because Errol can box too. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.